Good afternoon, everybody. It is Monday, May 4th, 2015, and this is Admissions Live. A little late going today as we have a very special guest, Jen Doak-Mathews from the University of Connecticut. We are going to talk about millennials. I had the pleasure of just coming back from the CASE conference, CASE Social Media Conference last week, and Jen had a great talk about millennials and how it's a very different, they're not what you think they are. It's very easy to pigeonhole millennials as we reach out to them from an admissions perspective, from an advancement perspective, and we'll talk about all those kinds of things, and we will take your questions live as well. So please join us on the back channel at the Higher Ed Live hashtag, and quite frankly, if you're still following along the CASE SMC hashtag, we'll do that too. So Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering live webcasts each week for professionals in higher education. Recorded shows and podcasts, always free and accessible to you in our archives at higheredlive.com, as well as on iTunes. Our live broadcast allows viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. You can share your insights again on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. Today's show would not be possible without the support of my colleagues here at Stony Brook, as well as from our producers, M. Stoner. M. Stoner is a marketing and communications firm that works with educational institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Admissions Live is also sponsored by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg connects the nearly 80% of college-bound students researching schools across the web with the colleges and universities who are trying to reach them. Using an online platform that includes 10 of the most popular college search sites online, Chegg can help you save over 90% on the cost of traditional methods for generating your inquiry pool. And you can email outreach@chegg, chegg.com, to schedule a free consultation. So as I said, my guest today is Jen Doak-Mathews. She is the Associate Director of Digital Engagement at the University of Connecticut Foundation up in Storrs, Connecticut, and she joins us now. So welcome.
Thank you, Chris. May the 4th be with you.
Yes, as well. I've got Darth Vader. Oh,
very nice.
There he is. So
I like it.
We're set. We're getting our nerd on this afternoon. So it's funny. We talk about we spent 3 days in Miami last week talking about social media and being goofy on social media, and I totally an hour ago tweeted a picture of Wolfie, our mascot, and Darth Vader. So we'll see. Maybe we'll break all sorts of Instagram records. I don't know. But so tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing at UConn now.
Sure. So about 9 months ago, I was hired by the UConn Foundation to do web, social, and email for them. And since I've been there, we're starting to integrate alumni relations efforts into that. So I'm now Associate Director of Digital Engagement here, and we're working toward a nice integrated strategy with university communications, focusing on both alumni and development content for those 3 areas. And before that, I was at CASE. So I've been hanging around the CASE SMC hashtag for a while and used to manage those Twitter chats there.
Cool. So last week at the conference, there were lots of great workshops, and this is our CASE social media community book that had some really, really fantastic discussions, and you did a great session that was actually aired here on Higher Ed Live on Friday morning about millennials and who they are, and almost just as importantly, who they aren't. It's very easy to try to sort of pigeonhole groups, but so why is it important to think about millennials as a group? I mean, it's almost a buzzword at this point. I feel like we use it so much, people don't even know what that means anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting how many articles have been written about millennials in particular, even compared to other generations. You go to any sort of blog, news site, whatever, and you'll see articles like millennials are the new age heroes, but they're actually lazy and terrible at working. Actually, they're not so different than you. Are they, who are they? People are mystified if you were to look at just an article analysis of millennials. But really, they're a large portion of who we're trying to reach. They range from parents at independent schools, alumni, donors, and the youngest are now heading off to college. So there's a lot of anxiety around it, a lot of trying to keep up with what they like, how they like to be communicated to. But if you take a look at the actual data, you'll see that while they're a big generation, they're also pretty diverse. They range in preference of, what sort of political affiliation they have. And really what you get to is that they can't be monolithic because they're big and diverse. And you could say the same thing about other generations too. So what ends up happening is that articles about millennials end up putting distance between non-millennials and millennials instead of trying to create bridges.
So I think that that sort of distance thing is important. I think that it's like, oh, kids today kind of thing that sort of happens. And I don't know how much of that is new media driven or, just the desire to categorize. I think there's a natural sort of desire to categorize, and whether that grew out of the baby boomers who, sort of became the first generation that was a thing that we talked about as a cohort, to use an educational term. And so it's natural to think of, okay, well, what comes next, and Gen Xers like myself, and what we are or aren't, again, as the case may be. And I think we've all sort of taken these personality quizzes. How millennial are you? How Gen X are you? And there are things about myself that I'm very sort of stereotypical Gen X, and there are things about me where I'm very much not. I'm a digital native as much as so many of our the supposed millennials are.
Sure. And, it's funny about those quizzes. I've taken a few, and I tend to rank pretty low on the millennial scale, even though I am a millennial. Whereas I think we were talking with a conference attendee, and she was in her 50s, and she got like 90% millennial. So really the habits and the ways that you use social media varies a lot. And it's not necessarily age that dictates that. It could be just your general interest and savviness with technology, whether you're an early adopter or not. It could be your demographic background, your socioeconomic background, how many languages you speak at home, what access to technology you have. That's a big one. I think the stereotypes about millennials are, I think we can all name a few pretty quickly. They live at home with their parents. Maybe they're hipsters, with their fixie bikes and their handlebar mustaches. They're frivolous, entitled. They're basically the worst. And, they're starting to generate articles about Generation Z now. So this analysis won't end even as millennials stop being the primary target for enrollment communications. As my understanding of Generation Z is that they like giving, and they're basically the opposite of millennials in that they're awesome. So I'm feeling totally inadequate right now. So we saw the Andrew Watts article in Medium, how teens use social media. It's written this past January, and they say that they don't get Twitter, where we see as not only a third of people in that age group are using Twitter, but they're using it in ways that are really important. It's not just tweeting about breakfast anymore. It's an activist tool. You see the hashtags Black Lives Matter, Muslim Lives Matter. There's a lot of activism, second screen use around Twitter in particular that directly contradicts his claim that teens just don't get it. So it really depends on where you're coming from and not necessarily what age you are.
So how does that impact what we do from a sort of a communication standpoint then? Because, we're looking at such a wide array of students, and obviously from the admissions end, we're looking primarily at 17-year-olds, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But, we're looking at transfer students, and we're looking at non-traditional students, and we're looking at, the diversity aspect, which is so important. And, how that, how those pieces all sort of fit together. And I think the point of the fact that, they don't get Twitter, but yet they do. I think one of the great things about social media and the way that they utilize social media is that they use it on their own terms. And I think we all do that to a certain extent as to, how we consume our news, how we consume, how we get information, how we research, our shopping decisions and things like that. And I don't know, was it your presentation where the stat came up that the #1 marketing search tool was like the App Store?
Yeah. That wasn't mine, but it's a good way of illustrating that point. And you go back to that article that Andrew Watts wrote, where he says Facebook is dead, and that's another strain of similar articles where you say, oh, Twitter's dead, Facebook's dead, email's dead, but their demise has been greatly exaggerated, as we see that even teens still use it. They just use it in different ways. They might not use it to share baby photos, but they use the Facebook groups and the messaging feature, and it's used more like a PO box now, where it's annoying to use, but even more annoying if you don't have one. And people of all ages kind of shape how that works. But back to your question on how we could apply this to enrollment, I think it goes back to a big theme of the social media conference was really capturing the shared experiences that happen on campus. You know, we're all going through a journey when we go to college, whether that's now or 50 years ago. We all had that same apprehensive feeling of being in a new place and a new time in your life. And that's really how you can start building those bridges, I think, is to capture those stories. What happened when you were trying to figure out what school to go to? Well, word of mouth continues to be a really popular venue for that, regardless of, you know, what types of pamphlets you get in the mail or what sort of social outreach. That might affirm it. You might, if you capture those conversations well, you can turn someone from a no into a yes, certainly. But it's really about those shared experiences that are powerful decade to decade, having older alumni connect to prospects and showing what makes your institution special, regardless of what year it is.
How can we connect with alumni better? I think that's a really good question. Elise Betts from the University of Pennsylvania did another workshop about the Y Penn program, the letter Y, Penn, for young Penn alumni. And they've got an overwhelming number of young alumni in their 20s who volunteer to interview applicants along the process, and really are very active and engaged with incoming students in a sort of a very different way. And I think what it means to be an alumnus and to be invested in your school has changed significantly over the last couple of years. It's not just about, oh, we're going to come back for homecoming or we're going to give money, but to really be invested in day-to-day life in where you have your degree from.
We're still at UConn trying to figure that out on our own, to be honest, how to better engage young alumni into the enrollment process. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. You know, one of the things that we hear a lot is that alumni used to give back because it was the right thing to do. But really what it is that, as you say, the transactions changed. You know, with greater student loans, there is maybe more of an emphasis on job connections, and there's an opportunity there. You know, people who went through school, had an amazing experience at your school, and now have a job. There's opportunities to mentor right there. I'll give a shout out to personal friend, school rival Syracuse, and their Working Orange program. I mean, I think there's opportunities to extend that to enrollment too. This is what you can get with a Syracuse education or with a UConn education. So really making those ties is essential, and don't discredit social media. I know there's still this perception that older alumni don't use social, but that's just not true. There was an 11% jump in Facebook use alone. So maybe Facebook groups have areas to connect with younger alumni as well.
Well, I think maybe that's one of the takeaways is don't make the assumption about you know, your population and whatever it may be, you know, based on a BuzzFeed article over what you think this generation may or may not be all about. I think you've got to find where your constituents are, whether it be your alumni groups or your prospective students, and meet them on their terms and find where you can make those connections, because you can't generalize to what this group is as a whole. And
one thing University of Illinois does that I shared in the presentation as the Is This Stupid Committee, where you have representative groups, and this could include non-traditional students because the way they choose where to go to school is not the same as your typical 18-year-old. So having groups of people, maybe first-generation college students, maybe newly admitted students, since they already have that buy-in from the school, run new ideas by them. If they say that's stupid, tweak it.
Yeah, I tell you, you come out of a conference with, a million different great ideas and all the things you want to bring back. And I think the creation of the Is This Stupid Committee is probably my number one takeaway of what I want to really bring back. And it's funny because I think I have that now, sort of informally,
Sure.
but to really give them a voice in the process, I think that's on my plan. It's at the top of my list, I'll tell you that, plus all the stuff that I'm going to now dump on our advancement folks that I came back. I was like, hey, great ideas that I got from Case. Now you need to do them and see how that will benefit us. So how do we, I mentioned earlier about, kids these days, how do we respond when higher ups, they want easily digestible numbers and they read a story that says email is dead. They read a story that says Facebook is dead, and they say, "Why do we still have a social media person if Facebook is dead? Why are we not looking at new things?" We've all had a supervisor on this. Every social media person has had a supervisor who has come to them at some point with a question like, "Hey, when are you going to set up a Snapchat account or something?" And how do you do that in a way that how do you get that forward in a way that sort of speaks their language? Yeah,
well, I think, the first thing to do is kind of read between the lines, because the source of their concern is an anxiety that we're going to be irrelevant. And so when people say millennials are doing this, so you should do that, what they're really saying is that the way that we market and communicate is evolving in the following ways. So it's not necessarily because millennials do that. That's a crutch, right? That's just a shorthand way of saying, well, kids these days are doing it. I don't really want to, but we're going to anyway, and we're going to blame them for it. When really early adopters are all ages. And just remind them, I think, what made them think that your institution was really special? What are those experiences that transcend time? It's so easy to write an article about millennials. You take a couple facts, you pick up a few kids off the street, ask them what they like to do, and boom, you've got an article. But you could show them the numbers that say older alumni are using Facebook and adopt your Facebook group in higher numbers maybe than other groups, and kind of work your way into showing that it's not all millennials or not all Generation Z, but really about how we're communicating and marketing as a whole institution.
So how can we sort of work together to do these kinds of things? And we're sort of straying all over the place from the millennials topic, but how do we work with, from an alumni perspective, to reach out to prospective students, in a way that they're all sort of speaking the same language, that the experiences that an alum had in, I was going to say in the 60s, but even 10 years ago. I mean, I look at our campus and the experience that an alum had here at Stony Brook 10 years ago is very, very different than the experience that a current student is having, and even that a future student will be having. And how do you add that sort of value to the greater conversation?
Well, I think it starts first, and this, the challenge I think for a lot of people is that what might work for one institution doesn't necessarily work for another. The job structures and who reports to whom varies a lot. So I could speak only from a large state institution, but man, those face-to-face meetings, you really can't beat them. Really go into enrollment, go talk with student affairs, talk with university communications. They have it from an alumni advancement perspective. It's so valuable to do that, to see what's resonating and what isn't. And then, I think right now this is also something that's really new for us, but really integrating that content from start to finish. Things like, in-person events like Huskies, well, ours is Huskies Forever Weekend, but our alumni weekend, which brings together, student volunteers through the class of 1965 and older for this year. it might be a good way to have those, in-person events. I'd heard some, one school do kind of a StoryCorps thing where older alumni interviewed younger alumni in a story booth. And so they captured those videos and experiences. I think there's a lot of potential there. So I feel like that's a start, but the ways that people will harness that in some ways is yet to be seen, and how that will evolve, I think, is really exciting.
And so sort of along those lines, as we're looking at sort of the way communication streams play out, don't be afraid to share ideas. I mean, that's one of the great things about sort of professional development conference type setups, where you're really comparing notes and on the enrollment side of things, and I've mentioned this on the show before, we're sometimes reluctant to share ideas at conferences because we're on the enrollment side, we're competing with these folks that we're at conferences with. But on the once you've got folks on the advancement alumni side, you are connected with that institution for life, and it's a really interesting. It's an audience marketing niche connection that you don't have with other brands. You talk about the we referenced JetBlue several times, for example, during the conference, how great they are on social media. And I love JetBlue, but I flew Delta because that was the best deal I had at the time. And so it's the connections that we have with our university are so very distinct. And the things that UConn is doing with their alumni, there's no reason that we couldn't do the same kinds of things with our alumni at Stony Brook, because those are in theory distinct populations. And it's, again, you've got to know your particular audience, but share ideas and be part of the larger community.
And that's an interesting point about JetBlue. I mean, there's so many really excellent examples of extraordinary, magical customer service. And that's kind of a common tie between enrollment and advancement professionals, as we both really, really put a premium on making sure that the experience of both people who want to go to your school and who have gone to your school is special, and those connections remain. And it is all really a customer service aspect to our jobs, and maybe that's where the common ground begins.
I think that's a good point. So I want to dial back to last week's conference a little bit. So what other takeaways did you get on your end from Case about other, whether it be trends, whether it be ideas, whether it be whatever? What else did you walk away from Miami last week with?
There were a couple. The first was the need for annual giving and alumni relations to work really closely together, which maybe at some smaller schools is something that they've done for years, but at larger schools it tends to be more fragmented. So the way they can tie the ask in with the experience, I think, can be really compelling. The second, and this was emphasized several times, is be funny. And there's a bravery to being funny, right? You could say, oh, well, yeah, I got jokes, but there's a difference between that and then also getting back actually transcending your admission speak or what's in your appeal, the safe language, into actually putting it out there in front of hundreds of thousands of people. So I feel like being brave and taking risks with humor was a big takeaway also.
Cool.
How about for you?
I think the big thing outside of the Is This Stupid committee and my new plan, I think the humor thing was important for me too. I think that people, regardless of what generation you're a part of or what your engagement level with social media, I think that people come to social media to yes, to get information and to be educated and whatnot, but I think they're there because it's fun. And I think the more we play along with that and are willing to engage, I think the more response we're going to get. And to be able to connect with people on their level in their medium where they are, I think is so very important. The other great piece was when talking about social media is, and I think this was yours, right? Are you coming in are you coming in as a friend or as a School dance chaperone.
Yeah.
That's right. That was fantastic, and I thought that was a really good point. I had one of our grad students who works with us here is a big Snapchat user, to use the Snapchat reference again, and I told her, I said, oh, hey, I created a Snapchat for the university, and she said, oh, that's fantastic, and then she said, why? So, the question of making sure that the what it is that you're doing sort of makes sense, and it's not one size fits all, but if there's a population out there for whom they're going to want to connect via Snapchat because that's how they're connecting with their friends, then it behooves us to explore those kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, it was a good conference.
Good times.
Good times.
Good times. Well, we are coming up on time, so I'm going to let you all go back to your office. And I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. Is your presentation up online anywhere yet?
It will be shortly. I'll put it on SlideShare today.
Right.
And I will share the link with everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Good,
fantastic. Because there was really great stuff there, and I thought that was very appropriate to the kinds of things we're doing. So again, thanks to Jen Doak-Mathews for joining me this afternoon. Up next on Higher Ed Live, Wednesday at 1 p.m., Heather Shea Gasser will talk about advancing the study of college student leadership and what that really comes down to in 2015. And Admissions Live will be back in 2 weeks with my co-host Nicole Lentini. Thanks as always to M. Stoner and to Chegg for sponsoring and producing the show. And of course, get reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. And you can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. And that's it. So I'm Chris Dorso. Thanks very much for joining us. And we'll be back next month with more Admissions Live.